Well, we are here with Nell, and he's going to discuss the Battle of the Bulge here at the Maryland Veterans Museum. Take it away, sir.
Well, Goober, welcome to Maryland Veterans Museum. We're going to talk today about the Battle of the Bulge, what I like to call it the Ardennes Offensive. This is what it's originally called. Basically, it's been in the works, the German High Command had it in the works since September 1944. Hitler and Jodl wanted to make some kind of a bold move against the Western Allies because they know fighting against the Soviet Union was a losing strategy. The numbers just weren't on their side. Basically, Hitler wanted to launch an offensive to drive the Allies to recapture the Belgian port of Antwerp. Basically, he wanted to do two things. There was a big solution and a small solution. And you can see here, again, they've been playing it out since September 1944. And it was called Operation Watch on the Rhine, which originally called. The called for, and then it wasn't, he had a big solution and a small solution. Like I said, the big solution was to capture the port of Antwerp. Basically, Hitler wanted another Dunkirk, like what happened in June 1940. His goal was to basically split the Anglo-American alliance, cause a rift. The second was, the small solution was basically to isolate US Army units. So by the time November came along, Watch on the Rhine turned into what's called, it was changed to Herbstnebel, which translates to autumn mist. Again, this was the options he had, the big solution and the small solution. This was the planned offensive to drive into Antwerp. This was the army plan of what the Germans had planned to do to capture. They had several army units that were going to drive through. Now, basically, the American perspective is the battle at Bastogne was the key to stopping the German offensive drive to Antwerp. Actually, it wasn't. It was in an area known as the Northern Shoulder. During the planning stages, this is what the Germans would have encountered, their own anti-tank obstacles. These are called dragon's teeth. Now, you see from movies in Hollywood and documentaries, like the Battle of the Bulge and Patton, the day of X-Day of Autumn Mist, tanks were you're led to believe that tanks were coming in droves, like what happened in Kursk in 1943. Nothing could be further from the truth. There was a huge snowstorm between the 1st and the 14th of December, but on the 15th and the 16th of December, there was a great big thaw, and then because of that, it limited the tanks to operate in just these low roads of no more than logging trails, and they were limited to traveling through villages and towns. And unlike what you see in Band of Brothers, it wasn't a snowy day that day in 16 December. So basically, the autumn mist timeline was, X-Day was scheduled for 16 December. The goal was to capture the Meuse River in 2 days. By the 18th, they planned reaching the Meuse River by the 18th and crossing the Meuse River on the 19th. These are some of the problems the Germans had. A lot of the divisions were basically decimated during the Battle of Normandy. A lot of the units under strength. There was a shortage of experienced equipment. Tankers didn't even get actual live fire exercises, and they only got as much as just 2 weeks of training. Now, there was an infantry tactics controversy where Hitler had wanted an artillery barrage on the Ardennes front. Well, the American units there, they're all hunkered down in these log bunkers, which protected them from artillery. So the day of on X day, 16 December, the artillery barrage showed that it wasn't effective as he wanted it to think. He wanted. So instead, they had to resort to 1918 World War I infiltration tactics, which were more effective. Again, the weather conditions, there was only freezing conditions for the first 2 weeks of December. And everything was just, when the snow started to melt, you have wet, muddy conditions, prevented tanks from doing what they're normally good at, open country warfare. So the offensive started 16 December. They expected the United States Army will take 2 to 3 days to respond. On the 17th of December, there was a battle near the defense of Lonsdale Crossing near the towns of Rocheroth and Crinkhill. There, an infantry battalion under the command of Lieutenant Colonel William McKinley, who was the grandnephew of President McKinley, was ordered to hold Lonsdale Crossroads on the night of 17 December. Well, he was greatly outnumbered, but what he had in his favor was he had a forward artillery observer that was in contact with 9 artillery battalions from 3 different divisions. And so the night of the 17th of December, when the Germans were starting to cross in the Lonsdale Crossing at Rocheroth and Crinkhill, that's when he called in artillery, and that artillery savaged the German infantry that was goes into the Rocheroth and Crinkhill. And here, after the artillery had savaged the German infantry, the Germans had launched what's called a panzer charge on the 2 towns of Rocheroth and Crinkhill. Well, the infantry got savaged by the artillery just the previous night. So they went into attack. Again, they're limited to traveling in these small logging trails. They're limited to traveling through villages and towns. And so without infantry support, tanks are pretty much useless. Tanks cannot operate without infantry support. Here, the 38th Infantry at Rocheroth Crinkhill had claimed 67 German tanks, had knocked out in that battle. And what the U.S. Army did, they used combined arms tactics. Basically, it's combined arms of artillery, armor, and infantry. You had infantry with bazookas and anti-tank guns, these 57 millimeter high-velocity anti-tank guns, running around villages and doing flank shots at the sides of the panzers. The tanks did the same thing. And so you had also artillery providing indirect fire support. And basically shows like they claimed that 67 tanks were knocked out. The Germans actually called Rocheroth and Crinkhill Panzer Graveyard. The turning point was, again, Rocheroth and Crinkhill, not Bastogne, as well a lot of people think it is. It was there, well, like I said, the combined arms of artillery, armor, and infantry stopped the drive to the Meuse River. Because by now, they should have been crossing the Meuse River. And then the 19th was when they were planning on, they were supposed to reach the Meuse River by the 18th and cross it by the 19th. And so that set the Germans back behind schedule right there. It's almost like they need to do something. So after Rocheroth and Crinkhill, they were going to do an infantry move right north of it area near what's called the Elsenborn sector. Here's the Elsenborn sector where the infantry tried to came in. And then this time, it was they were met by 20 to 25 artillery battalions. And they used this deadly tactic called time on target. And not only was time on target an effective means was a devastating artillery tactic, it was the first use of proximity fuses against ground targets. Prior to the Ardennes offensive, proximity fuses were used by anti-aircraft crews against planes with deadly effects, especially in the Pacific, especially during the Pacific campaign. So the failure of Autumn Mist, by the time on Christmas Day, von Rundstedt had basically switched to a defensive tactic. And so all this occurred days prior to the Bastogne being surrounded, and General McAuliffe gave the Germans the answer of nuts to surrender to the Germans. And the thing about when they had commemorations for the Battle of the Bulge, the veterans who stopped the original drive to Meuse River, they're pretty much ignored by history. They don't know the people who stopped them at Rocheroth, Krinkelt, and at Elsenborn Ridge have almost been, I hate to say forgotten, but they're like almost like an afterthought. And even when they had commemorations in Bastogne, well, here, like you see in the mural here, the 101st wasn't the only unit that was in Bastogne when they were surrounded by the German military. They had about close to 23,000 American troops defending Bastogne. 11,000 were the 101st. The rest of the troops that were there were elements of Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division and a tank battalion that was under the command of then Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. So the M4 Easy 6 you see here was probably part of Combat Command B. And then when you see kids doing cosplay of the 101st during the commemorations, they tend to forget the 10th Armored Division. So basically, in a nutshell, even though the Germans were already stopped at Elsenborn Ridge, fighting still went on well into the 16th of January. By then, the Alliance went back to where they were on 15 December.
Got a question.
Yes.
You mentioned somebody named Abrams. Is that where the Abrams tank name comes
Yes, it
from?
did. He was also Army Chief of Staff during the Vietnam War.
Wow. I know someone will ask me about the movie from the 60s, The Battle of the Bulge. Many people think it's a horrible movie. Is there anything positive you can say about the movie?
No.
Okay, you're just like every other historian.
The early scenes when autumn mist took part, you see the snow coming down, things like that. And the panzers were coming in big phalanx formations like they did in Kursk in 1943. Didn't happen. Like I said, first 2 weeks of December, there was a lot of snow. But the 15th and 16th, the snow just thawed. And you know what it's like, what the ground is like when snow thaws. It's marshy, it's soggy, and tanks cannot get through. That's why they were just limited to going through villages and towns. And the picture I showed you on the roads, there were just nothing more than logging trails. United States Army used that to their advantage, forcing the panzers to go through a choke point. So that way they can use their combined arms of artillery, armor, and infantry to stop them at Elsenborn Ridge and the two towns of Rocheroth and Krinkelt.
I have another question. They talk about this as the Battle of the Bulge, but you tell me that that is not the proper name of the battle. Can you shed some light on that?
It was actually called, originally, like I said, it was originally called Operation Watch on the Rhine. It was planned out the 16th September. 29th November, it was changed from Watch on the Rhine to Autumn Mist. The legend was the Battle of Bulge got its name from a war correspondent embedded with Eisenhower's staff, was listening in on a briefing, and when he was listening on the briefing officer was showing them how far the German drive had gone. And he was going to say, well, if he writes and calls it what it is, a salient, his readers will not know what a salient is. So he said, well, it does look like a bulge, and then thus the name stuck, because there is no such place as Bulge, Belgium.
Thank you very much.
And in fact, just around on New Year's Day, 1945, the Germans tried to do something to at least get the momentum of the Ardennes offensive going. They launched what's called, the first one was Operation Bodenplatte. It was a huge Luftwaffe fighter sweep along Anglo-American air bases on the Benelux region, Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. The Allies had lost 300 planes, but the Germans lost 200 planes, even though it seemed like a victory for them. They lost 200 valuable planes, but mostly pilots. And on that same day, they had launched an offensive in the Alsace region of France called Operation Nordwind. And then by first and second week of January, Nordwind fizzled out. By now, the Soviet Union was launching its drive westward. And then by 16th of January, Hitler ordered all forces to retreat back. Whoever survived Nordwind and Autumn Mist head back to the German frontier and try to face the Soviet onslaught. So Gruber, I hope you learned something from today.
Well, I have to ask one question, if that'd be
Sure.
all right. In that 1960s Terrible Battle of the Bulge movie, they do have the infiltrators, and I also saw that in the Van Johnson movie, Battleground, which seems incredibly realistic. Were there really that many infiltrators?
There are, the leader of the infiltrators was the name of Otto Skorzeny. He was known as Hitler's commando. He led this German special operations unit, and he did not get a lot. He tried to muster up hundreds, maybe thousands of English speakers, and he was lucky to get a handful of English speakers. They did create some havoc behind enemy lines, and to the point where even some generals were even, like, if you didn't get the right name of a baseball team or what division they were in, they're put under arrest. But some Germans were most of the German, most of the English-speaking German special forces units were captured, and they were given they were court-martialed on the field and given a summary execution. But very few of them were captured. But then again, very few were English speakers. Skorzeny could not muster enough people to do the kind of special operations he wanted to.
Miss Connie, do you
Yes.
have anything else you would like to ask the historian, Mr. Nell?
Yes, I do. Could you also please give credit to the owners of the slides that you used?
Yes, the slides I used came from Steven Zaloga. He is he's a historian and an expert on armored warfare. You can see him on various YouTube channels or podcasts, and I gotten the screenshots from his lecture that he gave at the Army Heritage Center in Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania.
All right, and Goober has been to the Carlisle War Barracks. He spent 12 hours there making videos. Anything else you'd like to say before we close out from our Battle of the Bulge veterans video we're making here?
Yes, I would like to add one more thing. Our World War II gallery is dedicated to a Charles County resident who was injured and taken capture during this battle. His name is Andrew Lawrence, and he was captured and wounded. He ended up losing his legs, and he was liberated by the members of the 101st Airborne Division. He came back home to Charles County, and he lived to the age of 99 years and 9 months and 9 days.
Well, and you have this nice memorial?
Yes, this was donated to us by his family, and our entire World War II gallery is dedicated to him, his service, and his memory.
Wow. Well, that is a wonderful tribute to him and all the veterans and your museum here. Can you end us off with what museum and where are you located?
We are the Maryland Veterans Museum at Patriot Park. We are in Newburgh, Maryland, just 10 miles south of the town of La Plata.
Well, thank you for allowing me to make this video and all the work you did to meet me here and have it prepared. Everyone, I'd like to say I hope you don't forget the sacrifices that our veterans made to keep America free. Stay safe, be kind, be courteous, and thank you for watching.